Hi, my name's Ian, and welcome to my channel. And this is just a short one to update the polls that I threw up about various games and what level of interest there might be in covering them in the long form. Now, these are the polls that I did, and they were all just, a handful of games in each alphabetical category broken up, and I had to do it like that because the silly poll thing here is limited to such a handful of things. But I then went and shoved them all into a spreadsheet so that we can see exactly what we have and where. Now, these two, D&D 4 and Stormbringer, I've already covered. But this is basically the results. So Twilight 2000 comes up as top. So it looks like that will be probably the next one that I pick up to cover. The Free League version of that, which is version 4th edition, I think they're calling it, is very good. But there's 3 other versions. The first 2 by GDW, and then an interim version by, I can't remember who by. Well, we'll pick that up when we do the research for it. But I'll also cover Mercenaries in there as well. But it's Twilight 2000. So T5 Traveller version 5. That's the one that's come second in there. Now we've covered up to Traveller 4 in the main line of Traveller. Traveller 5 is a good one to pick up. Very toolbox version of Traveller. Huge rulebook. But yeah. Basic role playing, which kind of ties nicely into some of the bits and pieces that we've done leading up onto RuneQuest and Call of Cthulhu. So BRP, if you don't know, is the core system that Chaosium put together, extracted from RuneQuest, and then has been used to build games like Call of Cthulhu, like Stormbringer, and so on. Bushido, that got higher than I thought. That's an old game about feudal Japan, samurai and all of that. Middle-earth role-playing, and Lord of the Rings, which was kind of like a cut-down starter game that sort of led people into some of the core concepts of the role master set in total. Middle-earth role-playing was a sort of extracted version of Rollmaster, tailored for Middle-earth. Possibly might touch into Middle-earth as a franchise and deal with other role-playing games that have come out in recent years since the ending of Middle-earth role-playing, such as things as The One Ring and so on. Not sure yet. We'll find out when I write the script and see what comes out of the woodwork. Shadowrun, fantasy cyberpunk game. Then we're going to BattleTech role-playing games, which will cover the MechWarrior games of old, and then the classic BattleTech role-playing game, which is effectively MechWarrior 3rd edition rebadged. Then into A Time of War, and the latest release in that run, which is MechWarrior Destiny, which is a simplified version of previous. It has a bit of more of a tie into, or an easier tie into BattleTech, the board/war game of giant robots knocking the snot out of each other. So Traveller variants, that's things like GURPS Traveller, the D20 Traveller that came out, Traveller Hero, and can't remember. I think that was about it, wasn't it? Yeah, that's probably about it. But they were sort of interim versions where the Traveller name and setting were licensed out to various other companies in order for them to produce versions of Traveller using their own games, their own core systems. Pendragon is another basic role-playing built game by a Chaosium, covering Arthurian mythology. I've always found Pendragon a little bit strange as well, because obviously as a Brit we have one view of... Well, no, we don't have one view of Arthur. We have a multitude of views of Arthur. And the Pendragon game seems to take in some elements that I'm not sure where they've come from, but we obviously have sources like Mallory and so on. But yeah, Arthur is one of those things. I might touch, if I do Pendragon, I might touch on some of the articles I've had published about Arthurian role-playing, more to do with Dungeons and Dragons than anything. GURPS is a core system. Yeah, fine. It's a generic universal role-playing system. Okay. D&D 4 we've already covered. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, that's a Palladium game. It's built on the Palladium system. Again, sort of cut down and extracted out to deal with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles setting. It is more connected to the comics than it is to the cartoons that many people might be more familiar with. Top Secret, spy game. Not my favourite espionage game, but it's a fair stab. One of the early ones. Star Frontiers, which is a science fiction game published by TSR back in the day. Current source of consternation. Not sure if I want to touch that at the moment, because anything about Star Frontiers right now might have to include elements of court cases and things. Anyway, Stormbringer we've covered. Mutants and Masterminds, very good superhero role-playing game. Originally from the D20 license, but has evolved since then. It's a very solid game. Judge Dredd, that'll be dealing as a franchise, probably going back from to the Games Workshop Judge Dredd role-playing game through to the D20 Judge Dredd role-playing game, up to the Mongoose's Judge Dredd role-playing game that was built from the Traveller rule set that they put together. Metamorphosis Alpha, one of the really early science fiction role-playing games. Conan, again, I'll deal with that as a franchise. So yeah, TSR did some Conan role-playing game stuff. And then there's been versions built on the RuneQuest core, basic role-playing core, whatever. And currently Modifius, I think, is the current holder of their license from role-playing game. X-Wing is the miniatures game, originally built from the Wings of War core system. The idea of templates for moving and everything else. Wings of War, Wings of Glory, then into whatever the Star Trek version of it is, I can't remember. Not a big Star Trek fan, I'm afraid. And then X-Wing. Works very well. Anyway, Palladium role-playing game, fantasy role-playing game. Sits at the core of a lot of what Palladium ended up doing, with Robotech and Riffs and so on. RuneQuest Adventures in Glorantha, which is the current version of Glorantha. Fighting Fantasy was the role-playing game that was extracted and expanded on from the old Fighting Fantasy. Pick a adventure, go to paragraph 37 now if you get killed by these goblins or whatever. Handmaster, probably one of the most, I'm not going to say complex, I want to say complete. When it comes to a game that is tied to its setting and evokes the feeling of a setting, Handmaster is pretty up there in that kind of concept. Very good role-playing game. Car Wars, up to, but not including 6th edition, the current 6th edition, and also not including whatever edition it was where they went for the Matchbox style cars and had this car versus that car in a set and so on. We're talking more about the 1-inch counter style of Car Wars there, which is the only one I'm really familiar with. Champions, another good, solid superhero role-playing game. Witchcraft, Now, what I might do with those is to lump the occult and supernatural into one chunk. Now, I'm not talking about occult and supernatural as in Call of Cthulhu type stuff, but it's more about where people have tried to take what can possibly be said to be real world concepts of witchcraft and so on, because that's awful, I can't remember the name of it, but there is another role-playing game that is sort of similar to witchcraft that I'd like to cover into that kind of thing. I mean, witchcraft in itself wouldn't take long to cover, but combining it with the other similar role-playing games would be quite useful. Sailor Moon covers the Sailor Moon role-playing game based on the anime. Necromancer is a Steve Jackson board game. That might be just an impromptu thing where I drag it out and show you how it works. Uses similar mechanics to a lot of the Steve Jackson board games of that era, going by ratios and so on. There's games like One Page Bulge and so on like that, and even Ogre is a similar one. Elite Dangerous role-playing game is a role-playing game based on the video game of Elite Dangerous. There you go. Hong Kong Action Theatre, which is Jackie Chan and ilk, based on the sort of movies that they did. Very fun game. Amber Diceless role-playing, that's based on Roger Zelazny's novels and uses a diceless system. Sengoku is a bit like Bushido. Now, are they set in different periods? I can't remember. Sengoku is specifically set in the Sengoku period. Can't remember the specific things. Bushido gets a bit murkier on that, but they're very good. Another feudal Japan role-playing game. Indiana Jones as a role-playing franchise. DBA, which is the ultimate successor to the wargame research rules, war games that were quite common in the UK through the quite a chunk of the early history of British role-playing, the British role-playing scene. So I ended up with DBA, and then the family tree from there, which includes DBM, DBMM, Field of Glory, and so on. Alternity, another TSR science fiction role-playing game. Didn't get any votes at all. Obviously not people that bother about it. I thought it was a reasonable attempt. Trouble is, it sort of came right on the changeover. It came after Wizards of the Coast had bought TSR, but it sort of was on the cusp of them phasing out the TSR thing, and by that time they bought the Star Wars license, so it kind of poor thing came along at the wrong time. Western City, I think, is a fantastic little game. It's sort of a GM-less Cowboys sort of Wild West game where everyone gets a say in one way or another of what happens during a day, and then it's role played out, and then you go on to the next one. It's a nice little system for killing an evening and throwing poker chips and stuff at each other. Tusk is a solo or two-player, a very adaptable set of rules. Mainly deals with in a solo sense, the reactions and actions of your opponents are dealt with in different ways. If you're like the core thing of Tusk, and the reason why it's called Tusk is that it's about mammoth hunting. So if you're playing it multiplayer, each player takes on a different hunting party of cavemen trying to have a go at mammoths. And if you're playing it solo, then it's your bunch of cavemen against the mammoths, and the way that the mammoths react are based on tables, and whoever wins is the one that brings down the mammoth. Right, Space Master is the science fiction version of Rollmaster. Spycraft is a D20 espionage game. Star Smuggler is a pseudo science fiction game. It's got very reminiscent of Traveller and the like. Love that game. Bought it when I was a scout on a scout camp from Lincoln, I think, and played it to death. Macho Women with Guns. In a way, it's one of the most misogynistic games ever, but in a way I'm kind of glad to see that further down the list, but it is fun. And then Silent Death. No one voted for poor old Silent Death, but it's actually one of my favourite science fiction / spaceship combat games. But there we go. So that were the results of the polls. I'm going to shut them down now because, but that's the general order of things. I think the next 5 long form ones are going to cover those. So Twilight to look for in the nearish future. Twilight 2000, T5, BRP, Bushido, and MERP. That will probably take us up to, I don't know, November, beginning of December, something like that. Depends on what we do. And don't forget, I've got the role-playing game setting series going on, which will be, I'll be covering Middle-earth as a setting as part of that. In the throes of working through Traveller's Third Imperium as a setting for that particular series, and other things will be like Greyhawk, Forgotten Realms, a bunch of the Dungeons and Dragons ones, and some of the ones that you might not have heard of that are attached to other games, Glorantha especially. That will be one that I am looking forward to doing. Right, there you go. And they are the results of the polls. So hopefully you enjoy them when they come out. Ta-ta for now.